Well, some media circles have described yesterday as a day of service delivery protest in South Africa, as you've seen them springing up from all over the place. Service delivery protests in several townships led to some areas in Gauteng, Pretoria and in the Western Cape being inaccessible. Even our reporters here at the SABC have borne the brunt of the wrath of these demonstrations. Some of these protests have been violent in nature and aimed at local municipalities for their perceived lack of public provision. Is South Africa experiencing a snowball effect of service delivery protests?
We are caught in a non-ending cycle where those in authority use service infrastructure as bait to catch votes. Anne Radcliffe once said, "There are a few instances in which it is virtuous to disobey." My work is titled Territories of Disobedience: Terror, Terrorism, and the Architecture of Compliance. In the work, architecture is defined as material or spatial evidence of systems of control. In this system, service infrastructure is used as a tool in political warfare. It manifests itself in temporary structures that do not include service infrastructure to promote tactics of discomfort that restrict one's ability to ever settle. This lack of provision is the terror identified on the refugee camp, and it is the kind of terror that inspires acts of disobedience that continue the cycle of crime and punishment. The residents of the site have been displaced from various African countries, with a majority of them being from the Congo. Many of these people left their countries as a result of fear of military presence, food insecurity, and other life-threatening conditions, only to be placed in a different country but with similar conditions. Disobedience can be described as failure or refusal to obey rules or someone in authority. The research aims to explore how territories of disobedience can be created as defense for architectures of compliance. The work's framing device is an evidential catalog inspired by the evidence case file exhibited at the Michael Hoppen Gallery and the Black Photo Album by Santu Mofokeng. The work is contained in 6 chapters that identify the complex relationship between power, complacency, representation, and architecture. An interrogation room is identified as a heterotopic condition where architecture of the space is used to exaggerate power dynamics. A chair, a camera, a door are all placed to become a set for a power play, where questions are asked and answered by those in authority. The work in this section of the portfolio is mostly grounded in Michel Foucault's ideologies from his book Discipline and Punish, where the relationship between architecture and punishment is made explicit. Here, the figure of authority is my grandmother, and she uses time surveillance and bodily inspection as her tools of control. On the left are scenes where surveillance takes place through both sight, sound, and trauma. The images document the procession of entering the TV room, which becomes an interrogation room once I enter. The participants of this interrogation are identified and their roles are explained on the right. When in the TV room, my body is used as evidence of any potential terror I could be up to in the outside world and outside of my grandmother's gaze. And just as a typical interrogation room, questions are asked and answered by the one in authority. My grandmother's perspective device is introduced into the research to physically demonstrate the lens that my grandmother would view me in during an interrogation. When performing, an audience member will watch the performance through my grandmother's lens at the specified position in the room. The orchestration of stories is an important tool in the creation of power dynamics. This section of the work looks at a site, which is a refugee camp located between Wingfield Military Base and Maitland Cemetery in Cape Town. Models and generic imagery are used as tools to orchestrate realities. Models are made with similar materials to materials that are used on site. They are intentionally made to not be pristine as commentary on how spatial practitioners remove themselves from realities of sight. The constructed generic images of sight exploits the gaze of the media and makes commentary on the gaze they produce and perpetuate. To continue to make the sight conditions realistic for an audience, the work takes up a detective gaze, where sampling of smells and sounds are used as evidence of the violence performed by the state, which I later identified as using service infrastructure to attain and maintain control over people.
Put on your blindfolds. Take deep breaths in throughout the experience and listen carefully. Sample 1. Sample 2. Sample 3.
Tools of disobedience are introduced to the project through a map of disobedience. This map is designed to locate refugees to the nearest places of work and education. It is coded and hidden in the form of an accessory. The base layer of the map is linen cloth with embroidery of streets made with wool, and the foreground is constructed with Photoshop to create the desired accessory. The work proposes architectures of disobedience. The research identified politics as aspirations of power over residents. This collage speaks to the cycle of non-service delivery, which usually results in protests that take up different forms. As a response to the deprivation of service infrastructure, I propose a service park. Parks continue to be used as spatial responses to social issues. My proposal is a new typology of park located on Alberta Street in Cape Town, which is located in close proximity to the SAPS, Magistrates Court, Department of Labor, Department of Home Affairs, and Parliament. To the government, the work will be proposed as a refreshment space for voters who have to queue the city from the early hours of the morning, as well as leisure for tourists. The programming of the park allows for cooking, playing, showering, and ablutions, which were identified in earlier explorations as what the government was using to maintain the power.